Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Welcome to the Planning and Parks Committee meeting for Tuesday, October the 18th. And may we have a roll call, please? Here.
We're having trouble hearing you.
Councilmember Ottenberg,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Galani. And we have a quorum.
So our first rule of business is to nominate a vice chair for this evening's committee meeting only. Do I hear a nomination from the floor?
Yeah. I think Mr. Bartoni coordinated with Mr. Farmer for this meeting, and so I nominate Joe for that reason only.
Any other nominations from the floor? All those in favor of having Mr. Farmer chair the meeting this evening, please say aye.
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 Turn it over to Mr. Farmer.
Okay.
All right. Well, with that, I guess we can get started with the approval of, thank you, with the approval of the minutes from the last meeting from September 20th. Would anybody care to make a motion to approve them, or does anybody have any thoughts or comments? Mr. Ottenberg is making a motion to approve. Mr. Flasher's seconding. Any thoughts or concerns or changes anybody wants to make? All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, minutes have been approved. At this point, we can give an opportunity to the public to make some comments about anything that's on the agenda here this evening. I don't know if we have anybody on the Zoom that would like to do that. It doesn't look like it. Nobody here in City Hall. So unless anybody would like to make a public comment, we can press on. All right, very good. First up, we've got planning and parks matters. We've got two things to look at tonight, one of which Mr. Vunich, I guess you'll be talking about the Acoustical Associates info.
Yes, Mr. Chair. And if Melanie would please promote Dr. Thunder, because I'm going to kind of turn it over to him with the chair, permission of the chair here very shortly.
Yep.
So just to give some background in preparation of Dr. Thunder, as you know, over the course of the last year plus period of time, we, as the committee and city staff, have been reviewing issues relating to noise along the two major state corridors that crisscross the city, Route 100 and Route 109. To do a effective analysis, we engaged Acoustical Associates, a company that had assisted the city with the aquaculture operation and a couple of other projects over the course of time. The consultant prepared a report that was presented at the last meeting to the committee with the direction that Dr. Thunder and his son Steve could not be in attendance, but certainly having the report in advance of the discussion would be beneficial, and the department requested that any comments or questions be formulated so they could be presented to Dr. Thunder tonight. Over the course of the last couple of days, the department provided you information that Dr. Thunder has revised, right, relating to the study, the assessment. And before you tonight, I placed the paper copy of the latest edition, so to speak, or version of the study. A couple of last things before Dr. Thunder goes through the analysis or responds to questions, whatever the committee should choose. The software has been updated and it allowed Acoustical Associates to do some additional analysis. And I think the key point of that is that 60 decibel location line. And that's referenced both on the daytime and nighttime graphics that were provided. And as you can see, although some of the homes are not necessarily inside that decibel line, they certainly are a number of them that are very close. And I will let Dr. Thunder identify those and discuss that analysis. Suffice to say, we appreciate the effort on the part of the consultant. And we did do the expanded area, as you can see, the Route 100, Route 109 intersection, and then finally in the vicinity of Route 109 and Pond Grover Parkway, two key areas that were added by the committee as part of this analysis. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll defer to you, but I believe if you would like, Dr. Thunder can at least give some background and then be prepared to answer questions regarding the findings. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Dr. Thunder, please tell us what we're looking at.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for promoting me to panelist. I don't get promoted in my lifetime very often, so that's good. Good evening to you all. I apologize too for the late revision to that. I noticed after I'd sent Joe our comprehensive report that really combined both studies, that when Steve did the computer analysis, he instructed the computer move the kind of window over to the left some to make sure that he had all the relevant points from 109, Highway 109, but we inadvertently had dropped off a point way over to the right. And so he re-instructed the computer and optimized that window and kind of zoomed back from it and reran the program to generate it to make sure that we had that 13th point off to the right there. And I think that point that we were talking about, I kind of put that in red in the table. It's the Rainforest point on Rainforest Drive and so forth. So that was the only real substance of the revision that we made. A lot of the discussion on the sound level criteria was from our previous report last year. I edited and modified it a little bit to simplify it. I'll point your attention to, I think, the most relevant criterion for this particular application would be the EPA recommendation. This is a 1974 recommendation that lists a day-night level of 55 dB as the threshold for activity, interference, and annoyance is what it stated. And that 55 dB day-night level was selected with an adequate margin of safety. In other words, it's conservative, we'll say. And the idea was that it's not law, it's not a regulation. The idea was that the federal government issued this report to all state and local governments so that they then could in turn review this and adopt their own set of codes that apply to their specific areas. And we'll talk a little bit later about that expectation adjustment. I know there's some questions on that. But we felt that that was the most applicable criterion to use. Everything else that's adopted by a housing and urban development really applies toward multifamily living with limited outdoor use. And that's generally not what you have in the locations that were selected. You have mostly single family homes and so forth. And the Federal Highway Administration standard is really pretty high at 67 dB. That's pretty lenient. So that's really meant as kind of a liberal standard, if you will. So I think the one that's the most pertinent one is the US EPA. And that's kind of been endorsed by the American National Standards Institute. Our company has done a number of studies where we go out and make measurements for realtors, hotel developers, residential developers, where we make a study of the noise and we determine using the ANSI standard whether or not that is compatible for the land use that they have intended. So the American National Standards Institute has like a whole page of different kinds of land uses, everything from a golf course to multifamily housing to single family housing to hotels and so forth. And they have a criterion that says up to 55 dB, they would consider that to be acceptable for single family homes. It goes up to 60 dB and they call that marginally acceptable. Okay, so it kind of gives you a little gray area there, if you will. So that's a discussion of the criterion that's used. What we had done then is to really reuse the program that we used last year for the Highway 100 corridor report and just adopt more points and so forth as you requested, put in more detail, some more data. We had to refine some of the Pond Grove things because when Steve first ran that using the Department of Transportation figures, it obviously wasn't right. And we consulted with Joe and the city to get accurate data for that particular road. And we reran the program and it looked pretty good at that point in time. So what you have in front of you is on the screen, I believe, is the daytime. I can't see the detail for that. And every contour that you go over, you can kind of see different shading. The legend is way on the right, is a 3 decibel change. Why did we pick 3 dB? Because to the human ear, 3 decibels is the just noticeable difference. So every time you move from one contour line to the next, that would be considered a just noticeable change. And so that makes sense for us to use that contour. But what was most important is to use the 50 and the 60 dB contour. So why do we have that? Not a day-night level. This computer program only works on the decibels for daytime and nighttime. It doesn't do day-night level. So what is this day-night level that the EPA calls for? That's a 24-hour average with a 10 decibel penalty from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And the reason they put the penalty on there is fairly obvious, because that's the time that people are most sensitive to the effects of noise. And so that is a metric that's been used for several decades. It's been used by all over the world and internationally. It's stood the test of time. But most city and state codes say, well, we're not going to make measurements for 24 hours. We don't have the enforcement personnel to do that and things of that sort. If we're going to make any kind of a requirement, we're going to break it down to at least a day or night. And so we can kind of take that 55 dB day-night level and break it down into two components and say, okay, 55 dB is average for the daytime period, and 45 dB would be the nighttime period. If you add the 5 dB expectations, then it becomes 50 decibels and 60 decibels. So why add the 5 dB expectation? Well, if you remember, I mentioned that the EPA set the 55 dB metric with an adequate margin of safety. So they knew right at the get-go that this was a conservative metric to use, and they let it up to the individual states and cities and local governments to decide for themselves in their own area what makes sense. So when you look at a number of codes around the country, most all of them will have different zones. So they'll say, well, if you're next to industrial property, the expectation is, as living there, that you're going to have a little bit more noise. And so like in the state of Illinois, we allow 6 dB more noise if the noise source itself is coming from an industrial zone property. If it's coming from a commercial property, then it's down to 55 decibels. That I would say would apply in this case as well. Yes, it's true that it's industrial, but you have to remember that the EPA doesn't govern or limit traffic noise at all. They leave that up to the Federal Highway Administration. In the state of Illinois, for example, you couldn't state that there was a violation of noise by going up to a road and making the measurements because the state exempts that. The only time the state would include the traffic of trucks and cars and so forth would be the moment that those vehicles enter that private property. Then it becomes a noise source that has to be looked at. So I've done that when we've worked for industrial facilities. The moment these trucks pull into that property, we have to consider that a noise source from that property, but on its egress and ingress to that property using public roads, then it wouldn't be. So I think that a 5 decibel adjustment, as we've had in this report for expectation, is such that if you buy or purchase a home on a roadway that you can clearly see, there should be the expectation that it's going to be a little bit noisier. In fact, I'm not sure what the realtors have in that area, but there are many times that realtors will offer homes on a perimeter like that are close to a road at a discount, simply because they know it's maybe a less attractive place to live. In contrast, if you're inside and away from that noise, and maybe you're next to a lake, then that home's going to cost a little bit more. So a lot of the home prices are adjusted based on their location. So if you take a look at the curves, then what we drew on there, and this was a new feature that we had on this new program that we had revised since last year, was the ability to actually draw a line of our choosing. And so for the daytime, we have the green line that kind of parallels those highways that represents 60 dB. For the nighttime one, you can see that it's a 50 decibel requirement. So basically, homes and residences that are inside that green line, that criterion line, whether it be day or night, would be expected to have a high impact. And you can see there's a number of them that are like that. For example, point number 7 is like that. There's a few homes near point 4 that are like that, and point 13. So it follows those kind of contours. And the reason the contours aren't even like that is because the computer program takes, I think there was another question, the computer program actually extracts information from Google Earth in terms of topography. So it does consider the topography and elevation changes and things of that sort. It will also take into consideration extensive vegetation. I think that was a question that I saw. Was there a clear line of sight, for example, to the roadway for all these points? We told the computer that there was a clear line of sight. Why? Because if you just have a few bushes here and there, that's not going to do much to attenuate sound. Steve, as a programmer, has to decide based on his field visit and based on the Google Earth views, what areas might represent substantial areas that would indeed reduce the sound. And that usually comes into play when you have a dense forest area. So there's one area that he's identified there topologically that is got a lot of vegetation that would attenuate sound. And that's on the the northeast corner of Route 109 and 100. You'll see that little green triangle with kind of the green hashing in there. What that represents is dense vegetation. And when you have dense vegetation like that, those contour lines go further out. You can see the contrast between the northwest corner there versus the northeast corner and so forth. That vegetation does have an impact. But just a few bushes and trees and so forth, there's a great feeling, a lot of towns that bushes and trees will absorb the sound like it's some sort of sponge and so forth, but it really doesn't. I know landscape architects are very popular with that. I've seen some books who will say, well, why don't you have this kind of a vegetation because that's been known to absorb sound. And that's not true at all. It simply doesn't absorb much sound. The only time vegetation would absorb sound or prevent it from being transmitted would be if it's dense, and it's probably something on the order of at least 50 feet or 100 feet thick, something on that order. Where you use vegetation, and I think we got down into my recommendations, is while vegetation between a home and a roadway is not going to materially decrease the sound, if it blocks the view of the noise sources, there is a psychological benefit from that. There have been studies that were done a long time ago that show that if you can block the line of sight, it has the impact as if it was 5 dB quieter. And on top of that, there are other articles that I've read where if you make it green, it's called the green effect, that people feel less, that the noise is less obtrusive. So putting green shrubberies and bushes and trees and so forth to block the view of the roadway is a positive benefit in a solution. It's not going to reduce the noise, but it's considered a positive benefit. And Joe, I don't know if you wanted me to go through each of the recommendations. I think there were some questions about that, but if you wanted me, I can discuss each one of the recommendations and its relevance and importance.
I think we're probably good. I think it's pretty clear in what you wrote in the report. I mean, I think we're getting a good sense of some different ideas. I think maybe at this point, the best thing would be to ask if anybody has any questions that we
Sure.
need you to answer directly. Ms. McCutcheon?
Yeah, can you explain what an acoustical fence is?
Sure. An acoustical fence, or sometimes people call it a sound fence, is something that has properties that will block the transmission of sound. Most of the fences that you've seen around towns that are called the shadow box ones or the stockade ones, they're meant to block the view, but if air doesn't get blocked, sound's not going to get blocked either. And so these staggered box style fences that you often see would not be defined as an acoustical fence. So an acoustical fence would be one that, number one, is heavy enough to block a significant amount of sound from going through the fence. Therefore, it's got to be something of a thick wood or concrete or earth, something that has mass to it. The second criterion is that it cannot have gaps or holes in it. So if this fence is built, it's got to come all the way down to the ground level. It can't have 1 or 2 feet as a gap. I believe it just needs to be built well enough that it's going to weather very nicely. I've seen a number of fences, particularly around the highways here in the Chicago area, that are just horrible. They're in horrible maintenance and boards are missing and it's settled and fallen apart. When that happens, it seriously degrades the performance of the fence. So that's what acoustical fence would be. So I think there was a question on, can you make one look aesthetically nice? The answer is yes. Any architect, I work with architects all the time, they understand once I tell them the properties of the fence, they can make it out of a decorative stone. I think composite wood is a very popular thing to use right now because it weathers very good. The maintenance is very low. It has a lot of integrity and so forth to last. And they can soften that up by putting bushes and landscaping in front of it. I've seen some that even grow ivy onto it to make it a kind of a green fence, so it's not so overbearing.
All right. Ms. Clark?
Thank you, Dr. Thunder, for your report. It was very informative,
Oh, thanks.
as always. And I'm just going over, I think that Mr. Venich sent you a list of questions that I had, and you've
Yes.
covered most of them. I'm looking at your list of recommendations, and the first one, the thick vegetation, I agree that is that's seasonal for one thing. And even if you had the 50 to 100 feet of vegetation, if all of the leaves fall off, it's a little different. And it would take some maintenance to keep that up. The buffer zone is probably not an option for us because we can't move the houses that are there.
Yes.
The earth berms, I'm looking at it and it looks like the easements are not going to allow that if we have a 1 to 3 slope on the berms to make them manageable. It's going to take for every 5 feet, 15 feet of land width,
Correct.
which is going to be on either side. So that would be quite a bit. Reducing the speed limit, as I understand, we've already looked at that and asked MoDOT and have been given a negative response on that. So when I come back to it, the acoustical fence, to me, of course, the electric vehicles, but that's very broad because we can't insist people buy an expensive vehicle. And people are coming in and out that don't live in Wildwood. So our suggestions for electric vehicles, it may happen just as something that's going to happen. But I don't think that can be our method of reducing this noise for the residents. So I come back to the acoustical fence or the acoustical fence with a berm, and you answered my question about can we make it aesthetically pleasing? And that's what I would say is our highest priority level mitigation answer. Because the psychological thing, we really don't think that we can base our decision on something that isn't a hard science. So in my perspective, I would ask if you agree with that would be the way to go.
I do, and I'm not surprised. My intent here was to try to lay out all possible options. It's up to you guys to decide in your specific case what's practical and what's not. So I try to lay out as much as I could, and that probably underscores for you why planning is so very important. Very often I'm caught as a noise engineer that when things have already been built and developed, it greatly limits options of mitigation. So prevention, an ounce of prevention, they say, is worth a pound of cure. And that's exactly what we're looking at right here. So truly what I've seen in most situations is they combine a short berm, something that's manageable. They put a fence on it. There's a lot of towns that have maybe an 8-foot height limit for any fences. And so you put an 8-foot high fence on top of a berm. In terms of acoustics, you just add up the heights of both of them, and that's the effectiveness that you get. And then you add some greenery on top of that just to make it look more aesthetic. So you've also achieved some additional psychological benefit. I understand what you're saying about the science, but the area of science that I teach is called psychoacoustics. And it's called psychoacoustics for a reason, is because it's partly psychology and partly acoustics. I mean, noise is defined as something that's adverse. We can define sound as a decibel level, something we can measure, but when we talk about noise, that's when we bring the psychology involved in it. And so I do think psychology is an important element, which is why I always agree with greenery and shrubbery to establish that green effect, no matter what kind of mitigation approach is selected. But I think that's the most optimum approach here, is a short berm with a fence on top of it and some greenery around it.
Awesome. All right. Anybody else have anything for Dr. Thunder? Okay. I think, Dr. Thunder, we can probably give you back your evening here. Your report was quite thorough. We'll certainly talk some more, but I think we're all clear on what we have to look forward to. So thank you so much for all the effort you guys put into this.
You're welcome. It's good working with you, and I'll work with Joe. We'll finish this up and put it into final form for you then, okay?
That'll be great.
All righty. Thanks very much.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. So Mr. Bunich, is there anything that you are looking for from us?
Well, certainly Dr. Thunder has provided us with a lot of options and considerations. And so I think tonight this was more an opportunity to hear from the author of the analysis, asked any questions that the committee members had. And I think we'll bring something back just in terms of a conclusion, what might be the next steps for some of those properties that have been identified as marginally acceptable or compatible.
Right. I might also suggest, I know it's kind of in this area, but there are certainly some properties that are west of 109 that could possibly be developed. So we may want to look at what we need to do or have the developers do there before we put anything up. That could be good. Mr. Rambo.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the reserve. That's the first one that comes to mind, but there are lots of other, as you said, we need to be proactive on this. Yeah, this is just kind of trying to see what sticks to the wall, but do we have room on the right of way for fences and berms and such in the locations that have been identified as the worst, as the most problematic? Do you know off the top of your head? Or what would be our plan for affecting this? Would it be on the person's property that's complaining, or would it be on the right?
Well, certainly that's a very good question, and I'm not prepared to probably respond to it, but I will say, at least along certain sections of Brightleaf, the city received a 70-foot wide, on average, public space dedication. And then the trail itself is in state right-of-way. So we do have some areas along the edges of right-of-way that are available to the city. The one thing Dr. Thunder didn't mention, but I think is kind of underpins all of this, is the acoustical fence is a very, very expensive option.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that is budgeted, as far as I know, in any of the capital improvement program for the upcoming fiscal year or 5 years out. And that's why I say there's, I think, some additional discussion that needs to follow tonight's meeting.
Sure, I was throwing that out because it's a question that we need to answer, not expecting you to answer that complicated question now, but maybe we can allow, maybe we can, share some people's backyards and so on and so forth. Who knows? But my basic question is, do we have any handle on the ages of the homes and how long they've been there? The ones that folks are complaining most about the noise, because as Dr. Thunder said, you can make an argument that they should expect a bit more noise. And the EPA evidently feels the same, or has the same philosophy. And so I'm just kind of wondering if we need to solve everybody's problems when they bought in Brightleaf, and now they have a highway in their backyard. Well, the highway, as far as I understand it, the traffic hasn't increased dramatically on those highways in the last few years. Maybe it has, but we need to answer that question, because I don't feel good about bailing folks out that knew what they were getting into. But I think it's imperative for us to do the best job we can to bail folks out that have suffered over time as the traffic ramped up. So that's just an editorial comment.
Ms. McCutcheon.
Yeah, in answer to your question, Dr. Rambo, the houses in Kingston was built in the early 1980s, I think. And so was the Hickory Manor was like 1990, I think it started. But when those areas were built, there was a lot of vegetation and forest and trees across the street, both across 100 and across 109. Maybe they should have anticipated what was coming down the road. I certainly didn't anticipate that when I moved here. So I don't know that we can say, oh, well, we can't assist them because they moved there. Because when they moved there, the conditions were different than they are now. And the traffic has definitely increased. When we were doing the Villages of Brightleaf study, we did a lot of transportation studies and noise level studies at that time, and traffic has definitely increased there over time.
So MoDOT, jumping in, MoDOT probably has traffic data that they could share with us, and we can figure out if the problem has definitely increased over the last 30 years. I bet it has, because there's just more folks back out to the west now and so forth. But the question becomes, how much assistance can we afford to provide? Maybe it's as simple as easing regulations for the folks that live there so that they can do something in their backyard should they choose, or something like that.
And I know it was a conversation with the developers that they were supposed to put berms along 100. I don't know where that went. I don't think it got in the bill, but I know there was a discussion about that. And then, Joe, my question to you is the area right there behind Rainforest and between Rainforest and Villages of Brightleaf, isn't that owned by MoDOT? I think we tried to do something there once before and MoDOT wouldn't cooperate. Is that true?
That's my understanding. And of all the locations that had been identified with potential negative noise impacts, the Evergreen subdivision actually predates the widening of Route 100 and its relocation. And so that's one location that, from the perspective of the department, the state should have addressed, because they brought the roadway almost into the rear yards of those homes in Evergreen subdivision. Others have followed in the late 1980s, 1990s, et cetera. But that one location is the outstanding issue in my mind, just because it was brought to them. They preceded the widening. Thank you. 13. Yep.
All right. Anybody else? All right. You good? All right. All right. Well, Mr. Vunich, it sounds like you guys have a little bit of work to still do. I think my suggestion would be to try to get ahead of some of these developments that have yet to happen down the way. And perhaps we need to get something on the books sooner rather than later to try to put that burden on somebody that isn't us. Okay. Moving on. Mr. Cross, let's talk about the budget.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Why don't we do that? I think everybody in this room has gone through this a few times. So this is actually the last one before we get together as a group on Monday night, the council. So on Monday night, we will review the budget in total that has gone through each of the committees and so forth. So hopefully tonight will be as smooth as the ones previous to tonight have been. So tonight we are going to look at a couple things. We will look at the operating budgets for both the Parks and Recreation Department as well as the Planning Department. We'll also review the 5-year capital plan as well as the capital improvement plan for 2023, as well as the 5-year plan. You all have had that information, so I'm not going to bore you and go through it line by line or anything like that. We'll start with the Parks Department. I will note, as I have in all previous meetings, we do have a balanced budget for 2023. That was a driving criteria to make sure that our budget was balanced. It took a little bit of work and took a few iterations and a little arm twisting on my part to the directors to get to a balanced budget, but we did get there. And the commitment that we will make to the council is that I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that we stay within our budget. We need to, and I'm making the same speech, if you will, that I've made to the other committees, that we have lived beyond our means for quite some time, and it's time to change our behavior as a city. It is not right when I come to you all at mid-year and ask for $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 for budget adjustments when we overran the budget. We need to stay within our budget, just like we do on our home budgets, and live within our means. So I have worked with the directors, the department heads, to get what I consider to be a reasonable budget. It is balanced, but my expectation will be that we're not going to go over these numbers, and there's going to have to be one heck of a justification to have to come back to the council and ask for some more money. So I will get off my soapbox about that, and we'll deal with the numbers themselves. Parks and Recreation, it is a decent budget in terms of the dollars and the expenditures compared to 2022. There's really nothing to point out that is different than what we have done in the past. So I guess at this point, I will simply open it up and ask if there's any specific questions about the operating budget for the Parks Department that I'm more than happy to answer, but I don't need to bore you and go through line by line.
All right. Does anybody have any specific questions about the budget?
In general,
Just the part we're talking about now, not the whole budget. So just the Parks Department.
Just the Parks Department, Parks and Plan.
I have some questions about that line item.
For the
Okay.
Parks and Recreation Department? Okay. Well, I'll put it to you this way. If you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You know, happy to send me an email. I'll answer any question and give you as much detail as you need. So, okay.
So then do you need anything from us like we did last time? You need us to
Yes,
approve it?
we
Okay.
need a motion and a second and a voice vote to approve the budget for the Parks and Recreation Department.
All right. Looks like Mr. Ottenberg is ready to make that motion, or did you have a question, Scott?
I am ready to make that motion.
All right. Mr. Ottenberg makes motion. Mr. Flasher seconds it. Then I guess we need a roll call vote. Is that what you'd like, Steve?
Yes, no, it doesn't need to be roll call. Voice vote is just
Voice
fine.
vote. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or any discussions on the motion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the budget as presented, so we can discuss it further at the council meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Mr. Rambo abstains. All right, the motion passes.
Okay.
Good work. Can't wait to hear more about it on Monday.
I think the mayor will limit me to about 1 minute so that we can move on to other more important things. But thank you. I appreciate that. And again, Mr. Rambo or any of you, any questions, please reach out to me and well, I guess it's not our intent to hand out paper copies. We have provided it in a couple different formats. Number one, it is in the Dropbox. So they're all in the Dropbox, and then they should have been attached here to the agenda. But I had one work here and gave up on it long ago. They should print this size. Okay, I mean, this is a print from that, and that's what I'm working with, you know, and my eyes are a lot older than yours. So I can.
All right, moving on. Mr. Vunich, looks like you've got our recreation schedule for next year.
Nope, we have a whole lot more budget to talk about.
Oh, exciting.
That was just 1 of 4.
That's 1 of 4. Moving on.
I will go fast though. All right, the next item would be to discuss the operating budget for the planning department. Okay, and same thing. There's really nothing that is unusual in the budget for 2023. Again, I worked with Mr. Vunich on this one as well, and we made the appropriate cuts where need be, and he has committed to me that he will stay within his budget. And if I put words in his mouth, that's my prerogative. But a little levity when you're talking about budgets is necessary to keep us all sane. Again, I'm not going to go through details. Happy to answer any questions either now or anytime you want to send me an email about it. And you'll have if I don't answer your questions, you'll have a second bite at it come Monday night anyway.
All righty. Anybody have any questions or concerns? Okay, would anybody care to make a motion to approve this, moving it forward? Ms. McCutcheon will make the motion. Anybody second? Mr. Ottenberg will second. All right. Any discussions on the motion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Mr. Rambo abstains. So the motion passes. All right. Next up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The next up item, we'll talk about the Capital Improvement Sales Tax Fund. As you all know, this fund, we do fund accounting in the city of Wildwood, whereby revenues and expenses for specific items are put into a fund. This is as opposed to the general fund, which is our main operating fund. The Capital Improvement Fund is based on the city's half-cent capital improvement sales tax. That then goes into the pool and it is allocated to the city of Wildwood through the pool tax based on population. But the capital improvement sales tax, as you saw in the detail, that covers a lot of things. The revenues from that fund, parks and trails development, roadway improvements, bridge reconstruction, other capital investment. So we'll focus tonight on the park and trail development. And that's really about it, because the other items fall pretty much within Public Works. So when you go through what is anticipated for 2023, as you saw, there's small items, relatively speaking, for the Cone Park repairs and Bellevue Farms, et cetera. The largest item on here is the Village Green, and that is slated for us $1.6 million expenditure in 2023, offset by some $575,000 on a grant that the planning department is anticipating. But there's also some fairly large dollars in the hard surface, which is $400,000, which is in the budget, and $100,000 for Old State Road shared use path. All in all, $2.5 million is anticipated to be spent in 2023 for the park development, offset by approximately $655,000 in some matching grants. So that's it for the capital, what is currently anticipated for 2023. Any questions for either myself or Mr. Vunich?
Mr. Ottenberg.
Question for the city administrator, the grant that you referenced, without committing yourself to this, what is the likelihood that that grant will come through as anticipated?
On the Village Green?
Yes.
With the chair's permission, I think it'd be more appropriate for Mr. Vunich to answer that question.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Ottenberg, both Melanie and I believe we have a very high percentage chance of receiving the grant. It's been a couple of years since we received a grant from this particular funding source, and we are one of 7 large cities, and they do rotate every other year between either 3 or 4 of them. So we have high expectations.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Cross, you want to just touch on the watershed erosion item?
Yes, there is one item which is down under the other capital investment, which are roadside beautification, city hall improvements and so forth. And yes, there is a $750,000 planned expenditure for engineering, bid development and so forth of $750,000 for watershed erosion. And again, even though it's not noted in terms of any offsetting funds, I know as Mr. Farmer well knows, there are folks on that committee and also our legislative consultant in Jeff City beating the bushes once, twice, if not 3 times, trying to get funds to cover the cost of that, as well as all the other projects that are anticipated, the 6 projects initially for the watershed erosion. So, but right now, $750,000 in the capital plan is for that as well.
All right. Ms. McCutcheon.
Yeah, there were some, I think, ARPA infrastructure possibilities of funding. Do you know where that is?
There is money from the federal government coming in multiple tranches. So the ARPA money we used for broadband, and then we'll have to dip into our own money to finish out that project. But there's talk, as we all hear, of additional funds, coming from Washington and flowing to the states and ultimately to the municipalities. I have no idea how much, timing, what it might be earmarked for. That's why we have Jake Silverman at Jeff City, tracking down all of those things. And yes, there is talk about money for watershed and that sort of thing. And I mean, we are talking to the highest levels in Jeff City about those kinds of things, but nothing is forthcoming or that we know of that is definitive at this point.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, real quickly, the watershed money, that $750K, is that allocated to specific tasks? I'm assuming this is all in Cox Creek. Is it, do we have a good handle on what we're going to spend it for, or is it just to provide some money for that committee to carry forward?
I'll give the short answer, which is there are specific projects, but either Mr. Farmer or Mr. Vunich would be able to speak in terms of those direct. But yes, no, that's just not just general money. There are very specific in terms of reconstructing whatever. So yes, they've done a great job, that task force, in terms of identifying, if they get their hands on that money, exactly where it's going.
Correct. Okay, it's not, is it going to fix anything or is it just engineering and so forth?
It might fit. We might actually be able to fix something.
Yes.
Which would be exciting.
2 out of 3. Yeah, okay, thanks. That's
All right. Anybody else? I just have one quick question for anybody that might be listening at home, just so we can clarify. In the event that whether it be something in the watershed or the hard court or the village green, something doesn't go quite as planned, what happens to the money that we're allocating to those things? It can be rolled back into other areas. Is that fair to say?
So if you're suggesting as an example, theoretically, if the hard courts didn't come to pass, the money that is proposed to be spent just wouldn't be spent. It's not been spent. It just would just kind of go away.
So in theory, we would, I guess, if we didn't do it, we would go from a balanced side of things to having whatever that is.
No, because the balanced budget is more revenues and operating expenses. It's not so much not the capital side of it. So the balanced budget is like an income statement. It's your revenues and your expenses, your operating revenues, your operating expenses, and this is capital.
Got it. Mr. Rambo.
So this is a more comfortable place to ask this question. The last couple of years at budget time, I have asked the same question, so I'm going to ask it again. The Route 66 task force group met at Pond School, and there was some survey work there, and a lot of people showed up and passed through the school. That's a resource that we can't use mostly because we have outdoor toilets. And so I wanted to ask again if there's and I think this is on the 5-year plan, or at least it should be. What's the possibility for that as a capital improvement, adding restrooms to the Pond School?
With the chair's permission, I would defer to Mr. Vunich.
Absolutely. We've talked about it, but I'm just want an update.
Well, just to clarify, there are indoor restroom facilities inside the school.
Are there now?
Yes. So
That's
there is a
something-
restroom
that's something
inside
new, isn't
school.
it?
No, it's been part of the school since we restored the building and opened it for public use.
Really?
Yes.
Well, didn't you and I talk about the lack of restroom facilities there?
I was speaking to the outdoor area, the playground and the pavilion. We have a portable facility there that's screened. We actually did look at building a restroom facility for the play area, and the cost was around $114,000. And so the thought was probably, given the extent of usage of that playground and pavilion area, didn't justify the cost at that time.
I completely agree. I was under the mistaken impression, because I've been to a couple of meetings there. I think it's a great facility. I had no idea that there were restrooms inside. So that's, never mind.
Awesome. Ms. Clark.
Yes, I just have one question for you, Mr. Cross. When we see this at the council meeting, or I don't know, whenever we're going to get it the next time and look at it, will the goals for next year as well as the accomplishments for this year be updated?
First of all, the next time that you all will see it will in fact be at the council meeting on Monday. It is on the agenda to go over the entire budget. We have approval for the operating budgets throughout the committees. That approval, and then we'll carry forward to the council. But then we'll review the overall budget, the overall fund, the general fund, to show that we have a balanced budget, the sources of revenues, et cetera, which we don't discuss it at this level because we're not dealing with revenues. In terms of goals, in terms of accomplishments, those are updated, and those are in the book, in the final book. And in fact, I think those are uploaded into the Dropbox now. So to the extent that the department heads updated their goals and updated their accomplishments, those are part of the plan right now. So at this point in time, they've been updated to the extent that the department heads updated it.
And I'm lagging behind on a few of them. So yes, it will be updated shortly.
Thanks.
All right, anybody else? Okay, so we need still need a motion, right, on this one?
Why don't we do them together? Why don't we do the capital plan as well as the 5-year? We'll
That sounds
kind of
great.
go over this and then we could just do a vote on that one in total.
I love it. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The 5-year capital plan is basically the same thing. There's park and trail development and other capital, which is, as Mr. Vunish pointed out, the watershed. But this will show you other items that are in the out years. So there are some significant dollars being spent for the old state road shared use path, and you'll be able to see, in 2024 are other items that are being spent. The Route 66 park, most of that's being spent in 2025. Those kinds of things. So again, that just gives you an idea to look at what's happening not only in 2023, but 24, 25, 26, and 27. So if you have not had an opportunity to review that, again, the offer stands. If there's any question about any of these capital items, either in 23 or in the out years, please feel free to send me an email, call me. You know where I live. So be happy to answer those questions. And then we'll have an opportunity at Monday night's council to talk it with all 16 members as well. So,
All right, anybody have any questions this evening on the 5-year plan? Nope, all right. Would anyone care? Did somebody say something? That was weird. Okay. Yeah, would anyone care to make a motion to approve the last 2 budgets discussed? Anybody at all? Mr. Rambo, maybe I'm looking in your direction. You're going to abstain, so you're not going to do it. Mr. Rottenberg, we've got a motion. Would anybody care to second? Ms. Clark will second. All right. All those in favor of moving these forward to Monday night, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And anyone abstain? Mr. Rambo. All right. So we will see this again on Monday night.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're good on the budget now? Yeah. All right. Mr. Vunich, tell us all about our recreation schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as has been the tradition of the department, as part of the budget process, we present to you what we believe are the major recreation events planned for the upcoming fiscal year, in this case, 2023. All of these are repeat events that we've done over the past 5+ years, starting with the half marathon that's held in January and ending with our holiday tree lighting ceremony in December. As you can see, many of these are very popular by the descriptions, and we get good responses from our residents about them. So tonight, the department is presenting this list of events for your consideration. I would note, as the editor's notes identify, that this does not include some of the classes, the early childhood recreation programs, and other activities that we provide, which are generally revenue neutral, as well as our efforts regarding the Night Sky Association, which we are participating with and hoping to add a couple of programs in Community Park for those that like stars and astronomy. If there are any questions, Melanie and I would be glad to answer them at this time. Thank you.
All right, Ms. McCutcheon.
Yeah, Joe, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see a dollar amount for the tree lighting.
Well, this year we've made it quite clear to the Wildwood Business Association that it's an event that they are in charge of. Last year, we had to step in the 11th hour, and we spent much more money than was anticipated and certainly budgeted. We've been working closely with the president of the WBA and keeping track of their progress. And so from that perspective, there are some costs. We'll pay for Santa Claus, we'll pay for the carolers. There's some setup costs with Gailey contracting, but all in all, those are standard costs that we've carried, regardless if it's a WBA partnership event or not.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else? Yeah, Ms. Clark.
I don't know if this is the right time or not, but just planning ahead with the tree lighting and getting the Santa Claus in. If we could get a signing Santa, it would bring in deaf and hard of hearing.
Ms. Nager is on screen tonight. Hopefully she heard the comment. We'll let her and our recreation specialist, Stacy, address that.
All right. Anybody else? Mr. Ottenberg.
Yeah, I was taking a look at the list. Where does the Tour de Wildwood fit on the list, or is that not something that should be on the list?
Mr. Attenberg, you're attentive to the list, and it is the question mark. As you know, we had a successful tour to Wildwood this year, just a couple of weeks ago. There has been discussion between the city administrator and others about the viability of that event, given its cost. I did not include it per se as part of the list of 13 major events, but I do believe that we could make that event revenue neutral or even end up making some funds or revenues for the city. I'm not at the stage yet to be prepared to place it on the list, but it may be something the committee will discuss as we get into fiscal year 2023. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, I just had one quick question, which I guess is more about this year than next year, but for the Christmas tree lighting, which I've gotten a ton of questions about lately. Are we going to start advertising that soon? And do we have like benchmarks in place so we know it's actually going to go on, or what's the deal with that?
We have Santa Claus reserved. We have the carolers reserved. We have the Christmas tree reserved. We have Mr. Gailey ready to do the setup of the tent. I've been hesitant to advertise, given that the WBA has yet to provide any specifics about the businesses that will be participating in, and more importantly, those that would be providers of food and drink.
So if it's not too much out of order, which I guess maybe I'm here, so it doesn't matter all that much. Who is our coordinator? Like, how are we doing that with the city?
The president of the WBA is Jenny Gotsky, and they are putting on an event on Halloween, and she's promised me after that that the city will start receiving a great deal more information about the participants and their role in this holiday tree lighting event.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Just to add a little detail to this. I called a meeting with the president of the WBA and the appropriate department heads, which that would be involved in this task, as well as the recreation staff. That was back in September. And at that point in time, we kind of laid the groundwork in terms of what the city's expectation was. As you all know, we spent about $11,000 of city money that was not budgeted last year to, as Mr. Vunich pointed out, we were not going to let the event not happen. Failure is not an option, as you've heard people say. So it was not an option. So we spent the money, we got it done. We scrambled in the 11th hour, 59th minute, but we got it done. We did make it clear in no uncertain terms that that is a WB event assisted by the city. And Ms. Goski committed to the city that she will take care of the major expenses. And as Mr. Vunich pointed out, we will have some small expenses. Our economic development manager is part of that process. But I have appointed Mr. Vunich to be the point person to work with Jenny on an ongoing basis monthly to make sure, are you on track? Are you on track? Are you on track? That event takes place somewhere around December 3rd or December 4th, if memory serves me correctly. And you are correct. We probably should start, advertising in one form or another fairly soon. So as Mr. Vunich pointed out, after so Halloween is 2 weeks from last night, I suppose. So we're pretty close to having another follow-up with Jenny and see where we are and make sure that we are still on track. But I think we could start thinking about how we're going to advertise and work with our communications manager and figure out how we're going to get all that done.
Yeah. I'm also just wondering, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I know how popular that event has become with our citizens here in the city. So I'm hopeful that last year was a blip rather than a trend, but I'm also wondering if we wind up in that similar situation, if it is perhaps something that we want to look at just doing as a city, as opposed to engaging the WBA in that way.
Mr. Chair, you raise a good point. And the WBA, they're having some growing pains. They're struggling to kind of find their way. From a leadership perspective to just, a lot of different things. I am hopeful. At this point, I'm going to remain hopeful that they're going to come through and do the things they need to do, but we're going to stay on top of it. And again, failure is not an option. So sooner rather than later, we're not going to scramble like we did last year, but we will pick up the ball. If it happens 2 years in a row, I would agree with you 100%. And I would make that recommendation that it become a permanent city event and the WBA falls where the WABA falls. But at this point, it's a little early to make that call. I'm still hopeful that they're going to pick it up. Others are not quite so as optimistic as me.
Yeah, I hope it's the case. Mr. Bunich, you had anything you wanted to add?
Given the interest that's been expressed to you by residents, I assume, of Ward 4 and others, we'll start doing some generic advertising, not committing to who or what might be there, but at least give the date, time, and information regarding the event.
Awesome. All right. Sorry, I monopolized that for a minute. Anybody else have anything they wanted to add? Okay. Do you need anything from us to approve it? All right. Motion made by Mr. Rambo, seconded by Ms. Clark. Any discussion on the motion? Okay. All in favor of the motion to approve the recreation schedule for 2023, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we have an approved schedule. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to planning matters. We've got a couple that are usually just kind of for information things. Is there anything in particular you guys wanted to add? I know we started a little late. I'm going to try to jam through this thing, but we're happy to hear what you got to say.
Well, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, regarding the first item under planning matters, it relates to the Historic Preservation Commission and the relative relationship of the city council liaisons to it. Under the current regulations relative to the commission, the city council liaisons are welcome to attend the meetings, but are non-voting members. And as you know, recently, changes were made by city council to the architectural review board that now allows the city council liaison to participate and vote. A question was raised by the liaisons on the Historic Preservation Commission if a similar authority could be granted to them. And so tonight, the department is presenting that matter to the committee for a recommendation. The department believes that it would be appropriate, given their participation and hours spent helping that commission do its best job. If there are any questions regarding the matter, the department would be glad to answer them. And Councilmember Rambo is the liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission, one of two, and he could certainly add to the conversation. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Rambo, you want to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, they're the thing that's lacking there's a lot of enthusiasm on that commission. What's lacking is a perspective of the art of the possible in terms of budgetary matters and those kinds of things and zoning and whatnot. They just don't get into that. And I think that's my job. Tracy Nyan is the other liaison. It's our job to do that. And this, I think, adds consistency across all the boards and commissions. So it makes perfect sense to me to do it.
All right, Ms. Clark.
I would move that we allow the Historic Preservation Commission liaisons to participate fully in all meetings and all actions related to such by adjusting the Historic Preservation Commission bylaws, I guess, to be consistent in this regard.
All right. Do we have a second to that motion? I think that's okay. All right, seconded by Mr. Rambo. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of giving the council representatives voting authority on the Historic Preservation Committee, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Mrs. McCutcheon will abstain. All right, motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on the turnaround, Joe, or is that just a?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you know, at our September meeting, we had a lengthy discussion about the cost of this particular project and its anticipated overrun of the current budget. The committee asked that the department consider alternatives and find solutions to reduce the price of the project. That has been accomplished. We were able to reduce the cost of the fence, and that brought the project down to approximately $116,000. The amount is still over budget, but at this stage, the department is encouraging the committee to consider the authorization of the additional amount, approximately $16,000, so we can complete the project and do the project in a Wildwood way, which would benefit the residents and be an asset to that area versus something that would be lesser than that. Money is available in the current capital improvement program for 2022 to accomplish this. And as we've talked with the Hardcourt area in the past, there are several projects that we will not be able to complete this year, and that funding is available. So tonight, the department is respectfully requesting the authorization to increase the budget to $116,000 as referenced in the memorandum. The department's available for any comments or questions, and thank you.
All right, Ms. McCutcheon?
Now, I move that we accept the department's recommendation to move forward with the purchase of the gates to complete the project, Birch Forest turnaround.
All right, does anybody care to second that? I guess no. So what do we do? What is that? What happens now? We just. All right,
So can I ask a question?
sure. Yeah, okay. Mr. Rainbow.
So I never understood the necessity for this project, but we're so far down the road and it will make some people happy in that local area. And so I was reluctant to second it because I've never fully understood spending this kind of money, but it's only 16 grand more. And from what you've said, it's doing it in a Wildwood way, which is important to me. And so I guess my question is, what can we get the job done for 100K, or what are we giving up? I guess a fence and some landscaping. Is that what we're giving up?
The discussion at the September meeting of the committee framed it as, do we eliminate the gate and retain the landscaping, or do we eliminate the landscaping and retain the gate? The landscaping has been a component of the project since day one, and that landscape plan has been circulated with the most impacted neighbors to the turnaround area. So there is a high expectation that what is done in terms of the road improvement also is softened by the landscaping plan that has been agreed upon by almost all the parties. The gate was a late addition, and it was an outcome of a discussion Mr. Cross and I had with the chief of the Metro West Fire Protection District and the fire marshal. We offered a lot of different options, but none of the options other than leaving it open with no obstruction or a gate really came down to the two solutions.
Right.
And I will tell you that the day I went out to take some photographs and prepare this memo, all of the cones and the barricade had been moved. It was wide open. My assumption was people are still using it. We talked about putting a camera out there to see the extent of it. At that time, the obstructions were there. So I just think the solution lies in doing it right, doing it the right way the first time.
Okay, I endorse that philosophy, so I will second that motion.
All right, Ms. Clark. Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. I guess my reluctance is just after City Administrator Cross said we must stick to the budget. So if it's 16,000 over, where can you tell me specifically where we get that money from?
And Ms. Clark, I think I can. And for the most part, what I would reference is when we had the discussion on the Hardcourt facility and in Community Park, we knew that the money that had been set aside, the $100,000, was woefully inadequate. And the charge of the committee was to look at other projects that we would not complete in 2022 and use that available funding. For example, Portner Park, we have $50,000 set aside in 2022 for planning and design. And quite frankly, we're not going to get to it here at almost the end of October. We intend to do it in 2023. We've referenced it as part of that capital improvement plan and the 5-year plan. So there is that available funding. Obviously, we'll spend it. It won't go back into the capital improvement reserve, but it's certainly a project that we are so close to completing, and it needs to be completed for a lot of reasons, not just because of traffic safety and emergency access, but there is an expectation of the residents in that area that this project would come to fruition, and I think it needs to.
Okay, so you know that I'm not a finance person. So if this money can't go, for Pertner Park can't be moved to 2023 on top of what we've got there?
Well, certainly there's a lot of ways to allocate funds, and Mr. Cross is our expert on that, not me. But I guess what I'm saying is when we prioritized the Harcourt facility, we identified a number of sources in this year's capital improvement plan that we could reassign or shift monies from to accomplish that goal. The process with Harcourt facility took longer. We had to understand stormwater management. We had to get the bid documents and the engineered plans complete. And so we were able to basically shift some of that. We took that $100,000 and the $100,000 that was programmed for 2023 and increased it to $400,000, knowing that that's the estimate that we got from the park designer. So we were willing to do it there. I just assumed that there'd be a willingness to basically take this project to fruition. It's underway. The retaining wall contractor was out there today, completed half of the wall that's necessary to support the turnaround. So we're in the 11th hour, to use that phrase again. And it's just an expectation that we raised in that area. And I do want to say that most of our projects are local projects. Quite frankly, not everybody goes to Community Park. They'll go to Anniversary Park. Not everybody drives on Wild Horse Creek Road. They drive on Taylor Road. And so most of our projects are local, and they affect only a portion of our population. And I don't see that as a detriment to this particular location.
Mr. Cross.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Vunish is correct in that this project is well underway and nearing completion. He is also correct in that the landscaping component of that project is something that the residents in that area have asked for, and Ms. McCutcheon has made sure that we stayed focused on to make sure that that occurs. I agree with all of that. As Mr. Vunish also pointed out, the gate or some means to block through traffic was brought up at the last point. But Mr. Vunish, if you would refresh my memory in terms of our conversation, not necessarily, well, it wasn't with the police chiefs, but there are other alternatives available to accomplish that same goal, which is to prevent through traffic. Mr. Vunish is correct in that if dollars in the capital plan are not going to be allocated to a particular project, they could be earmarked for a different project. However, I'm a big proponent of zero-based budgeting, and zero-based budgeting basically means each expenditure stands on its own merits. It doesn't mean, well, okay, when you're putting together a budget, you don't say, well, we spent 10,000 last year, so let's say put an inflation factor to it, and next year we'll put $12,000. No, you justify, you got to spend $12,000 each and every item. Mr. Vunish, if you don't mind, would you, I'm sure your memory is better than mine, could you perhaps just briefly go over some of the other alternatives that we discussed that were in fact acceptable to the fire departments that would accomplish both goals. Number one, hopefully minimize or mitigate through traffic. But also accomplish what else, the other items we want to do with the Birch Forest turnaround. I'm specifically talking about those pavers that have vegetation, grass and so forth that would grow up that people, we were having a conversation with Dr. Thunder about psychological. Well, when you see these pavers and you see vegetation, a normal driver would be hesitant to drive over it. The fire department knows they can do that. And the expenditure for that, Mr. Vunich, I believe is significantly less than the gate through Chesterfield fence and deck. Is that not correct?
Yes, the landscaping plan would be a component of that treatment of the access area to basically disguise it or camouflage it. And that's kind of what we were hoping to do with the current improvement. We have pavers that were installed that accommodate grass to go through them. So it would be a grassy surface versus a hard surface. And then the landscaping was to fill in so that it would narrow that access point and give the impression that it's not for vehicle access. And that was certainly fine with the fire district. They accepted it originally, they would accept it now. The other option the fire district spoke to is you can do nothing, just leave it open. We need access through it. We are going to use it. We're not going to use the turnaround, regardless if you've built it to our specifications. We don't like our trucks to back up. And so we'll just drive through. Obviously, that's the least acceptable option. We talked about bollards, and we've used bollards before to restrict access. However, the fire district says they don't want their personnel getting out of the truck, delaying the response, having to unplug from their headsets, having to basically navigate through whatever's there, remove the bollard, then go through. And so, like I say, they basically said we can basically keep it open, hide it, open it, not worry about it, or put a gate on it. Obviously, the gate is the most expensive component, and Mr. Cross is right. It is the highest costing option that we've discussed that the fire district would accept.
Yes, sir.
So we beat this to death in the last meeting, as you have both suggested, and I think I'm clear on the options. What I'm still not clear about is who are we satisfying by putting a gate in as opposed to just leaving limited drivability across that thing, where there I think there were just a handful of neighbors that didn't want that. Was something to do with subdivision infighting or something like that. Could you speak to that just a little bit more? Or maybe Deb, you're shaking your head like you know.
Well, there was no infighting. There was no infighting. Villages of Brightleaf residents also would like some type of gate, whatever you want to call it, so that people can't drive through there. We had the pavers, and I realized they weren't there long enough maybe for all the grass to grow and all that. But vehicles were still driving right on top of them, right through.
Sure, that stands to reason, because if somebody is hesitant to do it once, after they've successfully done it, they're going to do it every time, and somebody else is going to see them do it, and they're going to do it. I can see that being a real problem, but what I don't see is who is impacted by that versus a gate. And I thought it was when Brightleaf was built, the existing subdivision said that they didn't want through traffic or something like that. You're telling me that it's the Brightleaf folks that don't want the through traffic, or
well, the Brightleaf folks do not want the through traffic now either. There was a big discussion about even that becoming a through street. And then basically it became a through street as a compromise, because Pond Grover Loop was not going to go through. And Joe, you can help me if you want here, but it was just a compromise. I mean, we talked to the fire department at that time. The fire chiefs at that time said, no, it wasn't necessary to have a through street there. There were, I think, 3 other entrances into the villages of Brightleaf and into Evergreen, and it really wasn't a necessity. I know now they're saying that, they want that there, but originally the fire department didn't care one way or the other. But it was a compromise.
now they do.
Now they do. Yeah.
So Joe, is the gate 16K, is it that simple in terms of thinking about it? Is it roughly like that?
Yes, the gate has been reduced in cost. It's an attractive gate. It's a functional gate, meets all the fire district requirements. And again, the department is supporting its addition.
So you guys did everything right and you were within budget, but this semi-new requirement from the fire department is costing us an extra 16K.
Well, and again, as Mr. Cross mentioned, the fire district is more than willing to accept a open access, regardless if it's camouflaged or not. So there is another option they'll accept. It's just, is that acceptable to the people that live in that area? And what I've been told by them is that they were promised a emergency access, not a through street.
Ms. Clark.
Well, I think the gate looks lovely, but that's $16,000 over budget. And it is going to require preventative maintenance on it. And I know that there'll be maintenance on the landscaping also, but if this, I don't know what the shelf life of this is, that how long it's going to last, and then what do we have to do, get another gate? And I don't know, I guess the landscaping option to me stays in budget. It is approved by the fire department. It's maybe people will drive over it, but I think that, maybe if there's a sign that says not a through street, people will look at that and they will abide by it. And so I personally don't, I wouldn't support this.
Sorry. Mr. Vunich, do you just to help the committee members, do you recall off the top of your head the price of the pavers, just so they have a point of comparison?
Actually, the pavers are in place and were installed by the developer. So I don't know cost, but I could certainly get that cost.
Do you have maybe a guess? Is that versus a $16,000 option? Is it a $5,000 option or less? Do you recall?
My assessment would be it's probably half that cost, if not less.
Half the 16?
Yes, sir.
So just as a process, and I'll get Scott and Deb, I'll get you guys a second. So if we were to perhaps amend the motion, because it sounds like there's maybe a little bit of conflicting ideas of what we want to do. This has to go to the wider council anyways, right? Okay, just to make sure. Okay, Scott.
Yeah, I just was going to add, I guess I agree with Councilmember Clark. I've got some reluctance with approving the additional funds for this gate, since it would basically put us over budget. And with us trying to budget as tightly and closely as we can on various projects, I hate to start setting a precedent for going over budget. So I empathize with the residents, their desire for a gate, but I'm somewhat reluctant to go over budget on this project.
All right. Ms. McCutcheon, last word, I guess.
So there is a sign on it that says not a through street on the Birch Forest side, and they still go through there. We do, in the past, council has done this frequently, move funds from one project to another. There are funds there to move. The residents have been dealing with this project for a very long time. There's been many promises made to the residents, and I would hate to see at the 11th hour, one more promise is not fulfilled for the residents. we pay attention to residents in various areas when they feel like something's appropriate for their area. And I would really hate to have to go back to them one more time and say, I'm sorry, it's going to be, pavement, and you're going to have people driving through the neighborhood on both sides.
All right. Anybody else? Ms.
Just
Clark.
one thing, I was just looking at this now. We've been in this discussion saying that the gate is $16,000. It's actually $18,000. We've been saying the wrong number. It's $116,000 for the total cost of the budget, but the revised cost is down from 23,000 to 18,000. So that is the actual cost of that gate.
Okay,
It's not 16.
My apologies. I was mixing up the numbers. Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Ms. Clark.
Sorry, I just sat on the light side. I have this vision in my head of the bat cave and the gate going down and going back up.
Okay. So, I believe we have a motion and a second, correct? Yes, sir. Mr. Rambo.
Real quick, I'm sorry, we've beaten this horse to death yet again. Is it a possibility to just complete all the landscaping and give the plantings in the base, the pavers a chance to grow and assess the problem in the spring and then put in a gate if it's still a problem? I mean, maybe it won't be if once the grass grows up, maybe it won't be a problem. You think that's, yeah, we jerk you guys around enough, and I don't want to make you jump through any more hoops than we have to for this. That's why I seconded the motion. You recommended it. I take that seriously. Deb supports it. It's her ward. But I'm wondering if we can kind of have our cake and eat it too. Is that possible?
Well, that would be the intent. If the motion fails, we'll move forward with the landscaping plan and do our very best to make it as camouflaged as possible.
Okay. So does everybody understand the motion that we are voting on? All right. So, all those in favor of moving forward with the plan as presented by the department, and this is to move it forward to the full council, just to clarify, not necessarily, we're not writing a check tonight. So all those in favor of moving this forward to the next step, please say aye.
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 All right. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Ms. Clark is opposed. And any abstentions? Okay, then we will move this forward. Mr. Vunich, is this a thing we'll do Monday or no? It'll be a while, right?
Yes, it is on the agenda if the mayor approves the agenda as presented.
Okay, so we'll be talking about this again very soon. Exciting. Okay. Recent development trends, that is just for information. Does anybody have anything they want to add? Awesome. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
On the recent trends, I had, did you want to say something before I?
No, ma'am, but we'll do our very best to respond to your question. Excuse me.
Thanks, Mr. Rennish. The Mergen Temple, I have had residents asking about that again, and if we have any drawings or anything to give them an idea of what we're going to have.
The department can provide what I would call the phase one, which was the manufactured buildings to be brought on site as the temporary meeting space. We have that. The overall master plan, they've not provided to us yet. And we've not talked with them probably in several months now. It's been a long period of time. But yes, I'll provide that to you tomorrow and you can distribute it as you wish.
All right. I think if I can do this without objection, as we move into the Parks Matters, I would like to do the in-person and virtual recreation programs and facility rental information parts first, because my hope is just suggesting that we don't have anything to say about that.
Again, if there are any questions, Melanie and I will do our best to respond to them.
All right, anybody got anything for that? Okay, hopefully, let's try to close this thing out on a fun note. Ms. Ripito, please tell us about the Hometown Heroes and Veterans Day banner programs.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I appreciate you ending the best, saving the best for last this evening. And the department's excited to give you an update on the progress of the program. At the previous meeting, the committee discussed some important details and kind of finalized some details, including the location of the banners, which we intend to have along Manchester Road, Old Route 66, between Taylor and Etherton. The time frame we decided on 30 days around Memorial Day and 30 days around Veterans Day, and totaling around 60 days. And the sponsorship fee for the actual Heroes banners would be $150 and will include installation on both holidays. And after which the banners will either be given to the family or they can be stored by the city for renewal the following year at a reduced rate of $60. Then the city also looked into business sponsorship banners that read, thank you for your service, and then have a logo similar to the ones that we do for Celebrate Wildwood. That being said, those banners that Celebrate Wildwood, it's a $500 sponsorship fee for about 30 days, so 4 to 6 weeks, depending on when they get hung. And given that this is 2 separate time periods, we thought it would be fair to do $500 for one, but since you're not having to purchase another banner, to do the second one at a discounted rate of $300 because we wouldn't have to purchase the banner again. And these business sponsorship fees will be utilized to help offset the costs, especially the first year, because we will have to install brackets on all of the streetlights along Manchester Road, pay for the installation, pay for the brackets. And so given that this will be our first year doing the program, there's some unknown factors, such as the level of interest on either the sponsorship or the Hometown Hero banners. And so we've decided to cap it at 30 for either. We are starting this. We're hopefully going to launch this program on or around Veterans Day, because I feel like it would be appropriate and also great advertising, and potentially offer a card for like people that want to give it to a loved one for their holiday, that gift for impossible person to shop for. And so have a card that says this will be featured and win. And so that is our goal. Since our last meeting, the department has worked with the graphic designer for military tribute banners, who have been a delight to work with and unbelievably responsive. I am going to step over here. Okay. So the military tribute banners originally sent us a sample banner at no charge, which we worked off of. So they offer templates essentially that the city can utilize and change. This is what they sent us, and this was just out of the box. And so it has the hero on the front and then reads on the back, honoring our veterans, active duty military, and those preparing today to serve our nation tomorrow, which we thought was an excellent play on the city's logo. So that being said, thank you, sir. I will come back over here. That being said, I'm going to share my screen with you because the department worked with the graphic designer for the military tribute banners and changed things around a bit. So the image that you see there is, we found it to be a little bit less busy, took some of the stuff off of the front. And so this is what we have landed on. And then decided that instead of going with the white background, we thought that the blue was more appropriate, and you can actually read it a lot easier than the white background with the gold writing, and moved the seals onto the back of it to make the front a little bit less busy. And then keeping in mind those two, created this thank you for your service banner, which will then give you a space that then gives a space to insert the business logo here. So again, our goal is to have this program up and going. And so we created a trifold informational brochure. This is just a very rough draft of it. This was our first go at it, but wanted to include what the banners would look like and then also have the application because we really need very little information as far as the application is concerned. So wanted to include that in the trifold brochure so that we wouldn't necessarily need to have a separate sheet, a separate application, but we're going to encourage people to apply online. Because we can put everything into a spreadsheet and send it over to military tribute banners who will actually do the names so that we don't have to individually input all of them. So that being said, that wraps up the update on our Veterans Day or our Hometown Heroes banners. However, in the process, we wanted to include banners for other holidays down here in town center. Like right now we have holiday banners, we've got the Celebrate Wildwood. And so we were hoping to be able to get up banners for Veterans Day, which conveniently enough came in today. So I didn't have to show you the graphic. So these are just City of Wildwood American flag banners that we are hoping to get up down in town center. In the very near future, we are considering now, rather than just limiting them to Taylor Road, having them throughout town center a bit more. We also thought these banners would be great for any holiday that, incorporates an American flag, Veterans Day, 4th of July, Memorial Day, things like that, and can be used in conjunction with the Hometown Heroes. If, say, there isn't as much popularity with the program, then we can supplant these in with the thank you banners and the Hometown Hero banners. And so that being said, that wraps up the department's presentation, but we are available for any questions if you have any. We don't need any action on this. It was just an update to the committee. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Rambo.
Yeah, thanks for doing all this, Melanie. It looks great so far. I'm really impressed with those banners. The key to success seems to be the evangelizing of this new program. And so I'm assuming that it's going to be in all our city information sources like the Gazette and the weekly newsletter on an ongoing basis and on the front page of our website and all that kind of stuff. That's to be expected. My question really is, I just scanned the information that your trifold, but I didn't see clear criteria. We have military retirees. We have people that served for 3 years or 4 years. We have people that are in ROTC. We have people that just enlisted and are on active, in active duty service. We have killed in action. We have all those folks. And I'm wondering if there's a way to condense that down to a simple sentence that tells people really plainly, simply, graphically that, who is qualified, because some people might think, oh, it's only for active duty, when others might think it's only if you are a decorated veteran or something like that. So have you thought about that, or is it in there and I just missed it?
So truth be told, I think that we were going to leave it pretty open for anybody that is serving, has served, was killed in action, anybody that is currently serving or has served in the past are veterans and active duty military. That was the only criteria that we were necessarily planning to limit it to, as well as some affiliation to Wildwood. But
my point is just, we need to state that real plainly up front so that people see it and say, oh, hey, I haven't gotten anything for dad yet. Or my son just went to, Germany with the Air Force, those kinds of things. Because it's not immediately clear to me just as a consumer.
okay,
That,
excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Clark.
Yeah, so what if this is very popular and you have more people asking to put their banners up than 30? I was just thinking that can you offer maybe the banner to them, say the first 30 go up on the poles, and then if you still want a banner, you can purchase it for less.
So if I may, we did actually consider that. And we don't really want to turn people away. And we honestly have no idea. But again, the cost incurred as well as the time in putting up the brackets. So I feel like if there is an immediate response to this that says that it's going to go over 30 pretty immediately, we might be able to plan accordingly, especially if we had the sponsorship, to offset the cost. But the program does involve some planning and it does involve some budgeting. And so therefore, that's kind of why we wanted to limit it at 30 and then maybe reassess later. But we would like to offer people a wait list, and so that way, if they're not on it this year, they could get waitlisted for next year, or even possibly waitlisted for that year if we can figure out a way to make that magic happen. But figured that we needed to stop at some place, and also wanted to limit the number of sponsorship banners because you didn't want to have more sponsorship banners than you do hero banners. And so that was our intentions as of now. Again, we have no idea what's going to happen here.
All right. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I apologize for this. What if you have plenty of bashful guys that don't want their picture up there, but they'd be secretly proud to have their name up there? Are you going to? Maybe this is a question for the banner supplier, but do you put the logo of their particular service in place of their photograph, or what? Do you have a plan for that?
I don't have a plan for that as of now. I don't think that that's necessarily been an issue because most people don't purchase these for themselves. They purchase them for family and probably wouldn't have a choice as to whether their photo is on it or not. But if that was a circumstance, we could probably put something in the box that just says photo not available or something like that.
Oh, I
or
think you should solve the problem. Like I have a particular, actually 2 people in mind for this program. Saves me a lot of hassle and a lot of thinking. But neither one of whom would be thrilled to have their mug for all the world to see, and might prefer like their service logo
seal
or something like that. And so I think we should probably answer that question
Sure.
and give it as an option instead of just,
yeah.
potentially lose the business.
Oh, unquestionably. Yeah. And if you have any further suggestions, I'd be happy to receive them. We do have the seal like with the photo.
Mhm.
And so the seals are available and could potentially be blown up or something like that with just a neutral background and the seal taken.
I bet your banner people have solved that.
Yeah. Yeah. They've been amazing. So
Thank you very much.
absolutely.
All right. Anybody else? I'll just add one quick thing. I happened to give a tour to some Girl Scouts the other night, and there was a pretty good group of parents in tow. And when we got to tour the offices upstairs, they happened to see the banner, and everybody was very excited about it. So if I had to guess, I think that this program is going to be a lot more popular than perhaps we're planning on. And I think it's a great idea to limit the sponsorship banners. I am also pretty certain that if we had people that wanted to get banners, that we could find somebody to offset the whatever it is to put some brackets up there. I guarantee you that there is a business out there that would be more than willing to be the bracket sponsor for an additional 50 banners or whatever it is.
Sure.
So I would just encourage you that way. I would be cautious on limiting it. I mean, it could take a minute to get going, but there was at least 8 parents with me, and every one of them were like, I would 100% like do this. How much does it cost? And I was like, I don't know, $500. And they were like, done.
That's fantastic. Now that's good to hear.
So all right. With that, I think we've perhaps, unless anybody has anything they want to add. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Miscellaneous. We're done with the banners. We're excited about it.
Something we were talking about earlier made me think about a possibility, and you tell me if this is needed or not, to add a specific element of acoustics to our developers' permits. Because we were talking about it before, we need to plan that ahead. Dr. Thunder talked a lot about that. And is that something we need to add to the permit?
For the most part, when a zoning is proposed to the city and it goes through the process with the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately City Council, those are planned districts or PRDs. So we could add that as a component. We could even establish the limit we want at that boundary, like the 60 dB. In terms of individual lots, we would probably have to add something to our code, and I'll have to investigate that for you.
All right, anybody, Mr. Cross?
Thank you. I'm going to assume that there must not be anything good on television Tuesday night because our Director of Public Works, Mr. Rick Brown, texted me, and he must be watching this on Zoom. Why is beyond me, but he texted me to inform me that the Public Works Department, when we were having the conversation earlier about watershed and funding, he texted me and said that they have applied for ARPA funds through the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. So I wanted to just pass that along. And Rick, if you're listening, we're going to end now and you can go back to TV. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, does anybody have anything else? Okay, with that, I would love a motion to adjourn. Mr. Flasher, seconded by Mr. Ottenberg. Debatable. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone
Aye.
opposed? They're in favor. They were lying. Anyone abstain? All right. Good meeting, everybody. We'll see you next week. Yep, good job all.